normally on the second slide I'd have a list of my either titles or jobs, but I thought this was, my biggest achievement, so I'll show you a picture of this one, which is my family. So January 2020, we thought we had a few worries. We were worried about overspending on this lovely ski trip. We were very worried about the climate and the bushfires that were devastating Australia. We thought we had really bad ramping and overcrowding. When patients waited perhaps 2 hours to be seen. I really didn't know where the PPE cupboard was in my department. And I guess like everyone, you always think, what's ahead for the children in this world? and really, I look back at that time and think, oh my goodness, we just had no idea what was about to happen. So March 2020, like I guess most people, I was, in Brisbane working, going to social events, thinking this is all a bit of a nightmare and perhaps it's all a bit overblown and nothing much is going to happen. But as we all know, it all came crashing down from, I guess, mid to late March. And we were at home and the borders were closed and our world changed very, very quickly. So one of the first things that happened to me is that I was going to host a patient safety event for ACEM. I'd been chair or vice chair of the Quality and Patient Safety Committee for a number of years. We held an annual event, a patient safety event, which this year was going to be in Brisbane, so I'd really taken the lead organising it. And it was going to be on Friday, March 20th, 2020. And as you can imagine, as the days just crept closer to this event, the committee's meeting every day and saying, are we going to have it? Are we going to not? Are we going online? Are we going to do the same material? What are we going to do? And then 2 days out, on the 18th, we made, I think, quite a courageous decision and said, we're going to cancel it. People aren't going to come to Brisbane, and we're not going to talk about patient safety because everyone's talking about COVID. And so we held the first ACEM webinar that day. There was over 1,000 attendees, which makes it the most popular ACEM webinar ever. And we spoke about COVID, and we got in who we considered to be a little bit knowledgeable. So we got an ID physician, but of course they were dealing with it for the same time, first time, like we were. A director from Darwin who'd really taken the lead with his hospital, and the government department to prepare Indigenous communities for COVID. And of course, on the home front, things were quite difficult because all of a sudden, emergency physicians really are pariahs. Friends aren't dropping around to see how we are. They're not wanting our food packages. They don't want us to look after their kids or their dogs. And we all developed a kind of routine to go through when we went home, which involved no physical contact with our families. So we pretty much all developed some kind of showering, washing routine, derobing, and even I was fortunate enough to have a nanny at that time. She considered my house the hot zone. So she went through the same routine I went through when she went home. But it was also a sad time. So I didn't hug my children for a month because I didn't, sorry, I'm going to start crying. I didn't want to endanger them. But we went to work every day and people were very thankful around the world. All of a sudden we were on the front line. We were heroes. But we didn't want to be heroes. We hadn't signed up to the armed forces. We had not considered at any stage that we'd be putting our life on the line. The most I'd ever got from work was gastro. As a registrar, once. And so we were thrown into this position that we really didn't expect to be in, but day after day my colleagues and I turned up to work and the world was grateful. And so out came, of course, social media exploded, and I kept all of these tweets, and some of you will relate to this. Emergency medicine, we're not always the most popular specialty. You know, we ring people when they're busy, we might ring them in the middle of the night when they're asleep, and we ask them to do things that they may not want to do. But all of a sudden everybody was our best friend, and we were very, very grateful for that. Unfortunately, some of these things haven't maintained through the years, and I still have to declare what a creatinine is before getting a CT with contrast. But in case you're a cardiologist or a obstetrician gynecologist or even a paediatrician, you might relate to these tweets. But what we saw around us then was different industries and different people adapting to the circumstances. And the first big challenge for us was PPE. We hadn't particularly engaged with PPE before, we hadn't been worried, but now we were. And it was clear that the health professionals in Australia in particular, but really on a global scale, were being left behind compared with other industries. So these people are cleaning the trams in Victoria. This is before the Victorian surge. And at the same time, this is what we were wearing and often didn't have the mask. So I took this photo. This is one of the emergency departments I was working in April 2020. And you'll notice a couple of things. There's no masks. There's people crowded together. There's computer stations crowded together. There's no social distancing. And of course, the patients are just right there. They're not screened. I also, at this time, did a bit of work for the virtual emergency department where I've ended up 2 years later. And we were next to EOC, and interestingly enough, there was a cleaner that came around every 2 hours and wiped all the surfaces, wiped all the handles. Our workstations were spread far apart. No one came within a 1.5 metre radius of me. And I thought, this isn't right. How can I be in a busy emergency department seeing undifferentiated people off the street? And we had up to 13 people in a room resuscitating a patient, and at the same time the rest of the world is reacting to the situation we find ourselves in. So that became the beginning of the advocacy in PPE. But really, I guess that was just the start of it. So May 2020, it's clear that Queensland has somewhat dodged a bullet, but not all of Australia is going to be so fortunate. And so as time goes on, there's a lot happening on the work front, if you like, or the extracurricular activities, if you like. So I've always been active in ACEM, ever since my husband made a comment when I had just had my second baby and I was a consultant working part-time. And I think he regrets this comment because we were talking about what successful people look like and what they do. And I said to him, "Do you think I'm successful?" And he looked at me and said, "You're not unsuccessful." And I thought, and he's reflecting the views of society, but what he's saying is this raising children isn't really that valued. Other things are more valued. You're a doctor, you've followed a pathway, you've become a specialist, you do your job well, but maybe that's not particularly valued either. And maybe on the hospital front it's not. So the next time ACEM sent out a newsletter and said, "Oh, there's a couple of committee positions," I put in my hat. Got on 2 out of 3, and I guess the rest is history, really. So a couple of other committees popped up at the same time. St Andrews started to move into the GP education space. They'd really always been in that space, but in a face-to-face arena, and they adapted very quickly to online. And so we were doing COVID updates to 700-800 people on weekday evenings, and so I was, just thrilled to be part of that. And at the same time, the living guidelines, if you like, so the National COVID Clinical Evidence Task Force was being set up, and one of my colleagues who's very active in emergency medicine rang me up, and this really typifies, I think, my progress or announcement. And he just, "Oh, Kim, we need, look, we're putting together this committee. It's really important we get different people together. Look, we don't have anyone from Queensland and we don't have any women, so would you do it?" So on my merits, if you like, being a Queensland female, I got selected to join the critical care panel for the living guidelines, which has been a fascinating journey to be on. And at the same time, overseas, our colleagues are dying. And it was just devastating to hear day after day, week after week, what's happening. And many of you have family, friends overseas, I do, and they were getting COVID, and sadly a family member died too. So it was really, it was kind of not close to home, but at the same time it was close to home. And on the home front, the children are definitely not skiing, they're not even leaving the suburb. This is the local park, and this is really as good as it gets, because for a while there they couldn't even go to school. So as June came along, there was more and more activity. I'd been invited to join or to co-chair actually, an international group on crowding and access block. This actually started in 2019 as part of ACEM, which is the International Federation of Emergency Medicine. And again, I can't quite remember who tapped me on the shoulder, but I'd been active with ACEM through just the Quality and Safety Committee. And again, they had a male chair from Canada, and so he, in the interest of gender equity, was looking for a female chair from another country, and there I was. And so that was a fascinating journey as well, to bring together a cohort of 33 emergency physicians from around the world, bring together all the evidence and local expertise on access block and put together a 9,000-word white paper, which, if you're interested, is really good reading. So July 2020, things are looking better on the PPE front. Having said that, those goggles are from Bunnings, and the mask is something my husband bought online. But anyway, we're still moving up in the world, and the hat is something that my colleague's mum had made, or mother-in-law, sorry. But we're definitely feeling a bit more protected. And then it was a busy time, August, September. I decided to run for ACEM president. It had been on the cards for some time. I'd run 2 years before as I guess a late entrant, if you like, and was unsuccessful, but it was a very rewarding process. So I tried again, and a very busy time, but I guess I learnt the hard way that I ran up against a female, and I thought, females stuck together and supported each other, and unfortunately that wasn't the case. What I thought was a good friend decided to run against me at the last minute, and she was successful. So this was, my house looked like a florist afterwards with the sympathy cards and flowers. It was really hard for me to accept what had happened, but I realised that, as one opportunity passes by, others open up, and I wouldn't be in the roles I have now without that. But the children were just lovely. The youngest did think that I was going to unseat Trump, which was really nice. So she was quite hopeful about that. But it just shows that, it really brings home what's most important. But anyway, the speaking opportunities, if you like, go on. So this is me speaking at a high school, which I must say is one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. It's at a girls' high school, and it was a friend who's an emergency consultant at Gold Coast. She was asked if she could speak about medicine and what it's like to be a leader in the community, and she said, I'll do it, but I'm going to bring along a friend. So off we went together and had the most amazing time in Mount Alvernia. January 2021, we think everything's getting a little bit better. We all plan holidays. And so do I, and for the first time decide to, fly interstate. I think probably January 5th, January 6th. It happened to be the day that they announced a cleaner at Grand Chancellor was positive with Alpha, and unfortunately that meant my interstate holiday became a bit of an exercise in locking down and finding accommodation very, very quickly. But we did manage to see a little bit of Tasmania afterwards. So then this is early 2021, and we get vaccinated. I'm proud to say I was there on the very first day that you could be vaccinated as a healthcare worker in Queensland. And the PPE's improved considerably now. We've got proper N95s that are Queensland Health issued. We've got gowns that are actually somewhat comfortable and fit. Having said that, they fit tall women, they don't fit short women, which is a problem, and proper glasses. So early 2022, this man rings me up. I've seen him on TV and I've seen his name on things, but I don't know him, and he says, "Oh, we're putting together a ramping roundtable. Would you be interested in chairing it?" And he says to me something really interesting. He said, "Oh, I actually asked someone else first, who's this person, and she recommended you." And so I'm so grateful to Alex Markwell for just putting my name forward. I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I felt that I'd had the skills and was in the right position, given the access block work, to be able to do something useful. I'd been a pretty quiet AMA member for a long time. I joined up as a student. I thought it was a good idea at the time, and when the invoices came around each year, I paid them, and probably rang their line for some reason or other, like getting paid maternity leave, for example, about once in 10 years. I'd had a bit of interest, I guess, in a position, but never really done anything formally till now. So it was a really exciting, time and a chance to see how that organisation operates. And I can't really speak highly enough of what AMAQ does now. I'd encourage you all to join if you're not members. It's not just an insurance policy, but it really is, in case you're in trouble as an individual, as a group. But they really do support doctors in all facets of life, whether you're a GP, doctors in training, private practice, public hospital. I'm really grateful that they listen to emergency physicians who are crying out and saying, "This isn't working for us, it's not working for our patients, it's not working for everybody else's patients as well, and we need to do something." And by April 2021, I guess the media has started to latch on that there is a real problem. Yvette Darth's now the health minister. One of the first things she says is, "I'm worried about the staff, I'm worried about the people." And I've had the opportunity to meet with her since then, and I'm just so grateful that at some level as a politician she does grasp that and that she's able to voice that to us, because I think we forget that the most important resource we have in health is the people. Because it's getting harder now. People are getting stressed, they're getting burnt out. This pandemic we initially thought might be 3 months or 6 months. I delayed a holiday from March 2020 to September 2020 to New Zealand because we were optimistic and we thought it would pass, and we were so wrong, and I still haven't got back to New Zealand as yet. And I'm starting to see my colleagues falter. I've seen people drop out and not come back to work, cut their hours, or almost even worse, they stay in the role but their heart isn't there and their mind isn't there. So then I guess with the AMAQ and the Ramping Roundtable, the media opportunities present themselves. And I work in a public hospital, but you might be aware that we're able to speak on behalf of an organisation about the issues that we see, as long as we don't use specific information gained from our employment. And so I am able to speak to journalists at time. I always try and be respectful to Health Minister and the government, and try to avoid directly criticising them, but at the same time try to be the voice for the patients and the doctors and the other healthcare workers. And so this is another Career Mail excerpt. This is a stock photo you can find on Google. It's not that they're coming to my emergency department every month and taking a photo of me. But it's a bit of a skill to learn how to get up in front. I've been fortunate to have some media training through ACEM and AMAQ. It is daunting. It's very quick. These things last for about 90 seconds, maybe 3 minutes. And I think the first question I ever got asked was, does AMAQ support criteria-led discharge? And I thought, oh, you cheeky man, trying to trick me up here, because I didn't know AMA's position on criteria-led discharge, and I was there to talk about ramping and how patients are being harmed and doctors are being harmed. But anyway, I answered that I'd had good experience with criteria-led discharge, which I had in paediatric short stay at Prince Charles And so then we continued on more on topic, which was good. Come August 2021, I was, after avoiding lockdown for a period, we managed to find ourselves at the Grammar Open Day with, was it 5,000 other people, and someone, yeah, there's a few of us in the room, isn't there? And unfortunately, as over that weekend, found that we weren't just a casual contact who had to isolate until a COVID negative test, but instead 2 days later on my birthday found out that we would be considered close contacts and have to stay at home for 2 weeks, which really should be not as hard as it is, but there's 3 kids, there's no preparation for this, there's, you know, work goes on, and it was almost it became like a second job or a welcome relief, if you like, that the media took an intense interest in doctors being locked down. And so the first day, I think Channel 9 rang, and my husband said, gee, it must be a quiet news day today. Talking about a doctor being at home with her family, doing homework and a bit of baking and playing with the dog, the Cobber dog. But as the days went on, the media was more and more interested in us, because indeed there wasn't much else happening, but also it was just so wonderful to see the public support for doctors and healthcare professionals at that time, and which I think we continue to enjoy to this day. And so even the girls got used to a bit of media and what do I wear, Mum, and can I wear this, and what do I say, and they were really just little stars. So this is us on Channel 7. They came to our street and filmed over the back gate and did an interview with me on the phone and their journalist talking into a microphone about how we're occupying ourselves and how we're going. And yeah, we survived 2 weeks, but I wouldn't want to do it too often, luckily for the Olympics. Then soon after that was the AMA, what is it called, the ball? Dinner for the Profession, thank you. And so I had the opportunity to talk to Yvette Darth again about ramping and patient harm and the impact on doctors and other healthcare staff and how difficult it is, and that it needs to get fixed. And she has always been very respectful and listened and agreed, but is it fair to say that enough hasn't been done? So come October 2021, this is not just a Brisbane problem or a metro problem. All 4 of the big North Queensland hospitals went on code yellow at one time. That's never happened before. And so that was, I guess, a real warning sign that the healthcare system is failing its community. These hospitals don't have somewhere else to divert to. There's no bypass or load sharing. There's not really big private EDs that can take the load. It's a stretch system, and it's not just a Brisbane problem. And the AMAQ, and in particular Ramping Roundtable, starts to develop some specific demands, and one of them is the real-time data, and we were flagging that we're not going to cope when COVID comes. And of course the politicians would say to us, we are coping, we are ready, we've been preparing for 2 years. But the media kept the pressure on, and I guess AMAQ kept the pressure on, which was, it was good that we were doing that. And there's a bit more news, but at the same time, you know, it's fair to say not enough would be done. The AMA media person sent me this photo, and she said that, you know, it's so glamorous, isn't it? So this was something like 5:30 a.m. in the morning. There's a row of wheelie bins just behind me, behind that white picket fence, which didn't smell too good that morning. But it was I guess it was an opportunity to talk on a national breakfast show. And so, you know, we took that opportunity. That was live though, so that was, you know, even more scary. And December 2021, this is us now, and it's the real deal because patients are coming in with COVID. And we hadn't we'd seen a trickle of patients with COVID, but I actually hadn't seen one. But I was about to see first one. And by this stage, I'm warning my friends and family, you don't want to come to an emergency department over the next couple of weeks, over the next couple of months, because it's just going to be really ugly, because we knew we weren't ready. And that came to be true, really. What's my next slide? Yeah. So over the next couple of weeks, we saw a massive surge. What we discovered in the emergency department was that every COVID positive patient had to be re-prosecuted in terms of what their flow into the healthcare system would be. And we really did feel like we'd had 2 years of preparation, and yet we weren't ready. So at 3 a.m, when the COVID positive mental health patient comes in and needs an admission, all of a sudden that pathway doesn't work. The complex pathway that involved ID and a psychiatry and a transfer to another hospital didn't work. And I could tell you 10 stories of that. And those patients then stay in the emergency department. And if you're a mental health inpatient spending time in the emergency department overnight, it impacts negatively on your mental health, as you can imagine. You've got no daylight, you've got no meals, you've got no regular medication. You're pretty much you're almost chained to the bed, not quite, but there's steel bars up on a narrow trolley. You don't have a toilet that you can freely go to. The lights are on 24/7, it's noisy and you can't sleep. So it would affect the mental health of someone who is well, yet alone someone who's sick, and yet that's where we put our patients. And I could say the same for the frail elderly. But I guess another example would be the fractured NOF comes in. Elderly lady who's incidentally COVID positive, and all of a sudden all the pathways that you have for fractured NOF patients doesn't apply to this lady, but of course the pathway you have for COVID positive patients doesn't apply either, and so she stays in the emergency department in pain with a fractured hip, and she's not getting her operation, and she's not getting her prophylactic Clexane, she's not getting her regular medication, she's not getting visitors, and there's real patient harm in that. So Fiona Riley, who's a FACEM that I know, a paediatric emergency physician and also a creative writer, said that we as healthcare workers carry the scars on our heart. And I think that's true. Of all the deaths that we see, all the harm that we see, it stays with us over the years, and it just becomes part of the story. And it impacts us all, and I think that's one of the challenges going through with ramping, is that these episodes of harm will stay with us. So that's the moral injury that we're all dealing with. So February 2022, COVID comes to my house, so that's a bit of a rude shock. And my poor youngest daughter, who I didn't hug for a month, but now was back hugging, brings it home from school. So after 2 years of preparing in the hospital, wearing all this PPE, being incredibly careful, turns out it enters your house through the schoolyard. But thankfully, she recovered after a couple of days. She was quite unwell, and the power of vaccines meant that everyone else who was fully vaccinated in the house didn't get it, but we know it can happen at any time. And just this month, this is the AMAQ virtual town hall, so the advocacy is ongoing, really. I think, we owe it to our colleagues. We've lost colleagues from suicide in the last 2 years in emergency medicine. I know other specialties have as well. And not just then, we've lost colleagues mentally, we've lost them physically, we've lost them from the healthcare system, we've lost them from Queensland emergency departments in big numbers, and I worry that we'll never get them back. And some of them are young enough to have decades of work in front of us, and yet all that education and training is gone, and the most valuable thing we have is people, and yet the people are going. So I'll try and be a bit more positive now. So I think, in terms of my messages to younger people here, leadership is an action, not a position. And I was given this book, if you like. Oh, no, it is a book, by my best friend at uni, who said, your brain's in your head, your feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself in any direction you choose. And I love that, and I think you can, and you can put your energy towards anything. So how did I end up in this situation? So just a quick review. So that's me, that's the cutest photo I think I have of me, and I had the lady on the right is my grandmother and also a registered nurse, and the lady on the left was my great aunt, and so they're two grandmotherly figures that I grew up with and remained very close to, and that's my little brother there. And there I am, I think that's my first day at school. And we grew up, I just showed this to my daughter, she said, oh, you've got a certain style, Mum. I think, yes, it's a very old style, very ordinary upbringing, if you like, in suburban Brisbane. This is the extended family, it's not very big. And my mum is there, she's taking the photo, poor mum. So just be aware of those of you who are mums that you're not left out of all the photos. And there I am at school, and it wasn't, I'm not so old that it was only black and white, but that's the photo that I had. And this is my sporting highlight, if you like. I made a junior Australian team in European handball a very long time ago. In university. So if we look though what it was like back then, I guess I didn't know much about feminism or gender equity. I really was brought up on the girls can do anything, we're the same. And there's no difference and we're all treated the same and everyone's happy, whoops. And we were a decent percentage of doctors. So at my university we were more than 50%, and for the country we're 39.4, which actually isn't very high in terms of the worldwide scale for OECD countries. But I went through my training, I guess just working hard. I was young and didn't have a lot of, commitments, if you like. I don't think I was I was an academic student without being a particularly outstanding junior doctor, but I guess life was happening. I was travelling, meeting people, moving around. I had, some amazing clinical experiences. The hospital on the right is Warrabinda Hospital. Has anyone else been there? Yeah, it's quite an amazing place. We got sent out as sole doctors and acting medical superintendents as junior doctors from Rockhampton to a really struggling Aboriginal community that wasn't dry back then. So lots of violence. Went to the local swimming pool and the kids all just wanted a hug. I would bring in food to the clinic when I had some leftover food, and the children would just come in and take a sandwich or an apple or a hot cross bun and eat it. So then I started to bring in food every day and they would come in and eat the food. And in Rockhampton Hospital had a great time as well. I met my husband and we did really exciting things. This is in Chamonix in the French Alps. And that included climbing Mont Blanc, which is, I think, quite an achievement. Did some training at Gold Coast Hospital, and the hospital on the left is Poole Hospital in England, where I had a fantastic overseas experience, if you like, for 18 months. This is the family back together. My grandmotherly figures are still there and still alive, but my grandmother only for a couple more months after this photo. And then joined ACEM. Emergency medicine was always my first love, if you like. I saw doctors who could manage anything. All presentations go from a heart attack to a sprained ankle, newborn baby, to a centurion and look after them. And they got to wear scrubs and Nike sneakers and have days off midweek, go to the beach, and I just thought that was just so much fun. And of course, ACEM was quite a common pathway for female doctors back then and still now. So it's a little bit more of a shock, I guess, to see graphs like this where a lot of our trainees and FACEMs are part-time, not full-time, and it makes me reflect on what society thinks we should do and conditions us to do, if you like, rather than what we really want to do. And of course, I've worked part-time as well for periods of time, and it felt like the right thing at the time. But reflecting back, I wonder if, society, was Ira said, is better for, Ira, I'm looking for you. Yes, better for all genders, isn't it? if things were a little bit different. Through my training, we were in Melbourne, so this is Royal Melbourne and Box Hill, and I was fortunate to get my first consultant job at Box Hill through the actions of a female consultant who they'd advertised for a consultant, and I was about 6 months pregnant, and the start date was the due date for my first child. So of course I didn't apply, because why would I do that? And she rang me up and said, "Kim, please apply." And I said, "I can't apply because I can't start the job." And she said, "Oh no, just apply anyway." And what she knew and what I didn't know was that there was going to be another position come up starting a couple of months later, which was actually a maternity locum, if you like. And so I went along to my first consultant job interview, bursting out of my suit, literally, and still managed to come out of it with that job. And I'm so grateful to that consultant, Debbie Leach, for reaching out. And I think that really reflects my career, is I've had often females, but sometimes males just reach out to me and give me that encouragement to apply. So really that sponsorship, and that's something I try and do as well. So life changed, dramatically with the arrival of the little one on the left, my oldest daughter, and I became then, not just a consultant, but a mum. And then one became two, and we moved up to Brisbane, and this is us outside the Prince Charles Hospital, and the exciting thing of their day was coming up to meet me on my break, and they'd get a baby chino from the cafe. And they dress up as doctors, which is very sweet. And then, before we know, they're kind of multiplying before my eyes. And there's the other little one. But of course, life is pretty tough, juggling a lot of balls. And as mums, you're expected to juggle a few more balls than dads, which is another thing I think we need to challenge. And I think Chris and I have successfully negotiated that now. And of course, the ACEM opportunities continued to grow, and one of those was a position became available on the council, and I thought, that'd be really interesting. So I've been in a number of committees for years, and I thought, I'm not going to apply for that. I'm just quite busy. I think I was on a late shift. And then another email came out from ACEM, and it said, there's an inadequate number of members have applied for the council position in Queensland, so whoever applies next will get it. And so I quickly said to my other consultant on the late shift, I just need a 10-minute break to send off my CV to ACEM. And so next thing I know, I'm a Queensland councillor for ACEM. So I think a lot of the time it's not about, being the best on the field, it's just about putting your hand up and saying yes when the opportunity arises. But of course, there's inequity everywhere, and even with emergency physicians, we have a significant pay gap, which is hard to even contemplate, given that we're mostly public hospital doctors paid by awards. But what I've realised is that there's a few things in this. So one is that leadership opportunities often have a higher pay rate, and they tend to be disproportionately male. And certainly if we look at directors of emergency medicine around the country, we are not equal. We were a couple of years ago just at 16%, now we're about 24%, but anecdotally, females are often directors of smaller regional rural EDs, whereas the big metro trauma centres will predominantly be led by males. And also there is opportunity in some states and some awards to negotiate progress, which males are able to do, it seems, more successfully than females. In particular in New South Wales, a part-timer, to advance up the years, you need to negotiate that, whereas we're fortunate in Queensland that it's automatic. But several things, but in particular I think having an ACEM board that had 0 female members was enough to prompt me and a friend to set up Advancing Women in Emergency. So just a coalition of females in ACEM, and we welcome males as well. We have a couple to really advocate for gender equity, which we've been able to do through a number of different channels. ACEM certainly not free from problems. There's just some horrendous stories out there regarding discrimination, sometimes based on gender, but also a lot on parenting status, which disproportionately falls to females. And so I developed this sexism scale, which is based on a racism scale, about what it looks like, because we don't see necessarily a whole lot of overt sexism, although there is overt sexism, but we do see quite a bit of subconscious sexism or justification. Oh no, the females, those part-timers, they have to do a full-time load of after-hours work because it's only fair to the full-timers, for example, or they can't possibly have set days because that's too hard for the roster person. Before we're able to move to awareness and allyship. So subconscious sexism, what does that look like? I've got a very long list, but anyway, we'll start with these ones. Just the sexist jokes, the insults, the put-downs that just accumulate over time and undermine the confidence. The stereotype based on caregiver roles. The female is too often the secretary, the coffee girl, the baker. And what we find is that plans can be finalised in the men's toilet or on the golf course or out biking, which is why it's really important that we've got forums like this so that females can get together as well and also discuss and network and think about, how we make the healthcare system better, for example. And there's lots of inappropriate comments such as cry like a girl, you should focus on the children, or you're too busy for that role because of the children. And you might think that I'm somewhat immune to that because I've had some leadership roles in other areas, but you would be wrong. I have absolutely had, you can't have this leadership role because you should focus on the children. You shouldn't apply for this leadership role because you should focus on the baby. And more direct ones than that. But anyway, there's a lot of evidence to show that female emergency doctors in some ways provide better care to female patients than male emergency doctors, and that also there is a gender inequality there in how we're viewed by seniors who are assessing female registrars, for example. And of course, we're still dealing with the inequitable distribution of labour on the home front as well. But anyway, I'm training the next generation of emergency doctors, or trying to. And over the last couple of years, I've been fortunate to work for a wonderful team at St Andrews, who've gave me my first director job and really allowed me to grow. They've even put me on a banner out the front, and my mum keeps saying to me, can you ask them to have the banner when you go? I said, no mum, I don't want the banner. I've also had the opportunity to represent the Emergency Medicine Foundation. I'm so grateful to Peter Isdale for being here today. This was yet another opportunity where a male colleague simply picked up the phone and said, Kim, EMF board opportunities coming up, why don't you apply? And by now I had the ACEM faculty position, which was also a case of a male ally picking up the phone and saying, hey, you're on the exec, why don't you apply? I think I got both positions because no one else put their hand up, but don't tell anyone else. And within a couple of months, found myself as board chair of EMF as there was a mass turnover of the board. I felt relatively inequipped to deal with that, but I've learnt from wiser people, put some great people around me, tried to upskill as much as possible, and it's been a really interesting journey through up and down. But what we do is we fund emergency medicine research. We're mainly government funded, but we're a separate not-for-profit organisation, and it's just a beautiful role to be a part of, and I would definitely encourage you to do something similar. Of course, that's another area of inequity if we look at ASX boards and representation in terms of chairs and also female directorships. So if you do get the opportunity, most of these are of course unpaid volunteer roles, but it's just so great to be at the table making the decisions and to be part of something bigger than yourself. So I find it really hard to define leadership, but that's, I guess, some of what it is to me. But really it's about watching other people grow and watching other things grow and doing things that are just bigger than yourself and bigger than what you can do. And like Ira said, I have this secret, not so secret, passion. I think it's what keeps me sane. I can get much more upset about a poor basketball performance than I can do about a bad day at work, which I know is the wrong way round. But I have the opportunity to play with the most amazing women, and for 1 hour when we run around that court, we don't really care about anything else than where that ball is and is it going in our hoop. It exposes me to a broad diversity of people. We have, who do we have here? We've got grandmothers, we've got stay-at-home mums, we've got a lady from Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander from Cairns, people from overseas, we've got an anti-vaxxer, don't tell anyone. Actually, we've got 2 anti-vaxxers in those photos, but there is also another emergency physician. I don't know if anyone can spot her. And last year, the most amazing thing happened because my children have watched me go off to basketball, come home all sweaty and tired, but with a big smile on my face, and all 3 of them said, "Mum, I want to do basketball." So even though they don't quite have my height, I've signed them all up. And of course, the first thing that happens when you walk into a basketball court and you're 6 foot tall is someone approaches you and says, "Oh, would you like to coach?" And I say, "Oh, no, you don't understand. I work full time and I'm an emergency physician. I've got 3 kids." And they're like, "Oh, yeah." And then they come back about an hour later and they say, "None of the other parents know how to play." And I go, "Oh, okay." Happy to coach if I can, when I'm there, but you need a backup. So every team has a backup parent who coaches when I'm not there, because of course shift work and other obligations mean I can't be there, but it's just the most beautiful thing to watch the next generation learn some skills and develop. And on the right-hand side, every so often we win unexpectedly. We beat Somerville House that we'd never beaten before, and it was just one of the happiest days of those little 8 and 9-year-olds' lives. So life goes on. We did get to Tasmania recently without getting locked down, so that was definitely a bit of a highlight so far, and I'm looking forward to hopefully some other holidays and trips away to make up for the last 2.5 years. My parents are still going strong, as is my brother, and really couldn't have done a lot of this without that solid family upbringing, but it's not to say it was perfect. One of my parents has chronic illness, being quite unwell on and off through the years, but here we are, all of us at a good age. So now this is my latest position, and I really feel that I'm in my happy place now. I have 2 great jobs. I work at Redcliffe Hospital by the sea with a whole heap of wonderful ladies at the back there, and also virtual emergency department, which if you don't know what it is, please come and ask me. And if you're a GP, please use in Metro North, please use our service. That's another bit about leadership, and I think I'll finish there. Thank you.